Good night. Welcome to Alternate Views. I am the host, Stuart, and first let me say my apologies for the glitch this afternoon. Um, Having some load up challenges, but nevertheless, we are live. So thank you guys very much for tuning in to Alternate Views. Yet another Thursday, streaming live from Bridgetown, Barbados. I want to welcome you this afternoon. So let me say good evening to the sponsors this afternoon. Lifelong learning, as usual. Like to those persons at lifelong learning, the Human Development Foundation. Good evening to the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute. Good evening to those persons over at Stuart and Perkins Caribbean, offering real estate and economic advisory or advice according to your needs. So, I want to welcome those persons who we see here. So, let me take a time out to shout out to Annette Wood. Good night to Beijing Britt. And good night to Sean Paul. So, welcome, Sean Paul. Welcome, everyone. I can see so far we're up at 21 persons. So we just want to give the others a chance to jump on the dive tonight. Tonight promises to be a very interesting discussion. We are discussing America and, China, no trade wars. We are discussing the future of Barbados. Tonight's episode is sponsored to be in name Back to the Future. So, what does going back to the future look like for Barbados? We will discuss, we'll discuss a lot of that this evening. So I don't have Nigel this evening, and we don't have Ramon this evening. So I'll be carrying this segment solo. But feel free to stop me as usual. Feel free to write your comments and ask me questions so that I can answer those questions for you as I proceed. Yeah. So yes. So yes. So the internet is very weak tonight, people. So please to bear with me as we go through this evening's program. Now, as usual, I like to start the evening session with a quote from the Living Bible paraphrase. So to start this evening's session, we're taking a quote from the Book of Kings, chapter 2, verse 11, and it says here, in starting again and again, the Lord has sent prophets to warn both Israel and Judah to turn from their evil ways. He had warned them to obey his commandments, which he had given to their ancestors through these prophets. But Israel wouldn't listen. The people were as stubborn as their ancestors and refused to believe in the Lord their God. They rejected his laws and the covenant he had made with their ancestors. And despite all his warnings, in their foolishness, he worshipped heathen idols despite the Lord's stern warning. They defiled all of the Lord's commandments and made two calves from molten gold. They made detestable, shameful idols and worshipped Baal and the sun, moon, and stars. They even burned their own sons and daughters to death on the altars of Molech. They consulted fortune tellers and used magic and sold themselves to evil. So the Lord was angry. He swept them from his sight until only the tribe of Judah remained in the land. But even Judah refused to obey the commandments of the Lord their God, and they too walked in the same evil paths Israel had. So the Lord rejected all the descendants of Jacob. He punished them by delivering them to their attackers until they were destroyed. For Israel split off the kingdom of David and chose Jeroboam as its king. And this king drew Israel away from following the Lord, and he made them sin a great sin. And the people of Israel never quit doing the evil things their new king led them into doing. That is until the Lord finally swept them away, just as all his prophets has warned would have happened. So Israel was carried off to the land of what they call Syria, where they remain up to this day. And that is today's biblical quote to start the day with. Randomly selected, so whatever wisdom that may depart upon you, let it be. So some may ask why we always start alternate views with a biblical quote. That is because we are believers in God above. So therefore we bring that level of wisdom to impart the good, positive spirit of the Lord, in our discussions, and let him guide it the way it's supposed to. Now, it sounds a bit like Barbados, about not turning away from doing specific things that we know are harming us, some of the bad practices that we continue to hold up and refuse to depart from. If you listen to the quote well enough, you could see a lot of the characteristics happening today in Barbados. And that is why we're here, because we love Barbados, and we're here to discuss or head back to the future in tonight's discussion. What will Barbados do? Who will Barbados choose? Will Barbados choose America? Will Barbados choose China? We could go back to the old famous saying by Prime Minister Al Barrow. You will be friends of all and satellites of none. But is it practical to not be a satellite in this day and age? Is it practical to be a small island developing state without a real voice, or without a real voice, without a real decision-making voice, or the power to make any decisions on the international level, which would help the country? So even though we have elected parliaments and have had elected parliaments since the independence era, these politicians that we vote in are basically like under the thumb of much bigger powers, under the thumb of much bigger powers. So there may be some unseen forces, which determines the future trajectory of a country. So the planning and strategizing and stuff that organization seeking power would have to undertake, it can't be done in silo because there will always be other forces working in and around your agenda, that will try to guide it in favor to them. Hope you understand that. So international diplomacy would say that Barbados should befriend America, Barbados should befriend China, Barbados should befriend Russia, Barbados should befriend Israel, Barbados should befriend Guyana, Barbados should befriend Venezuela, right? So the slogan, friends of all us listeners, suggests that we could be friends with all of these nations, with all of these countries. But in a world where countries battle for world domination and for supremacy, that is really not practical because much larger countries tend to want to get smaller economies or smaller countries on their side in terms of voting at the United Nations, securing votes for the World Trade Organization, and these institutions, right? These institutions, unelected institutions, by the way, right? These unelected institutions are set up to do a specific job. I can explain what I mean. So at the end of the day, when Barbados goes to the United Nations and voice their opinion, right? And y'all know quite well about speeches at the United Nations because almost all of our prime ministers went to the United Nations. Barrow, straight up, all of them went to. Even foreign ministers, have spoken at United Nations on behalf of Barbados. So speaking at the United Nations is not necessarily a new feature of our political economy. It always existed. Now, I could admit that it probably has the highest level of visibility right now, as in social media, online engagement. Barbados is almost at its height of popularity on the international scale, as it relates to a leader giving these powerful speeches, these heartwarming speeches that capture the attention of the universe, the global world, right? Barbados is fairly popular, and we can say based on those speeches that were made at United Nations that Barbados gained substantial popularity in the international world. So I could identify what I mean by international world. So Africa, there has been a significant increase in Africa. There has been a significant increase in interest from Africa into Barbados. We had the establishment of flights from Ghana, establishment of flights from Ethiopia. We are seeing the African at Zimbabwe. We're seeing Ghanaian nurses, and we're seeing an opening up of the political economy into more African trade, right? Into the European world, Barbados gained significant popularity among European countries, and it was here among the working classes, of these populations, not the elites alone, but the working classes of these countries, became familiar with Barbados in, latter stages because of associations and partnerships. Right? Now, the root of this increase in perceptive popularity on the international market started with Barbados' decision to enter into the IMF program. Right. So before 2018, Barbados was not in the IMF program. After May 2018, going on to the latter part of the year, Barbados signed on to an IMF program. Right. So in the international world, the stakeholders, the people looking on, the credit rating agencies, at the time we had the existence of the downgrades. At the time the debt to GDP was increasing. People say it was almost like the third highest in the world, below Japan and I think probably America or so. We had an increase in the printing of money to be able to sustain wages and to sustain other expenditures within government, and the international market did not have confidence to invest into Barbados through the multilateral system that is, right, without the presence of an IMF program. So countries would invest, but they would feel better that they would get the money back with the presence of IMF program. So government gone ahead, jumping to the IMF program, appoints an advisor directly from the IMF to be able to help craft and guide the program. That was Dr. Gavin Greenish, who was the technical advisor to government at the time. We had Professor Avinash Prasad, who was the special envoy, particularly on finance and investments. Dr. Clay Maskell, who was chief economic advisor. And then we had three ministers substantially taking up stake over the economy in terms of management of the Barbados economy. So when you look on at personnel, again, three ministers, 20 advisors, the presence of an IMF advisor, the willingness of the government to enter into the IMF program. You will hear the economists say, well, this IMF program will stabilize the economy. Like stabilize the economy. So with the presence of the IMF program, the IADB, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Green Climate Fund, the IMF's new RST program, the World Bank. These institutions started to lend Barbados at a rapid rate after 2018. Like, so the whole idea of entering into the stabilization program with the IMF was to get access to foreign exchange, because the foreign exchange or the reserves at that time, the experts criticized the reserves as being too low, and therefore the IMF stabilization program would be to have access to foreign reserves, right? Have access to foreign reserves to be able to buy all of the stuff that we like. So because Barbados is pegged to the US dollar, right? So because Barbados is pegged to the US dollar, we constantly have to be seeking out foreign exchange we earn a foreign exchange. However it comes through, you can have exports, manufacturing exports, service exports, etc., that which should earn you some foreign exchange, or you have to borrow. Right? Or you have to borrow. So here's the government not earning anything, borrowed um substantial a substantial amount of money through the presence of this IMF program. Government say this cheap money, right? And they have to give you this background, so and it will all become clear. So this cheap money that we are borrowing at 1% will be the savior for the Barbados economy, because when the previous government borrowed money, they had to borrow money at 7% and 8% at some absurd interest rates. So they are going to borrow at 1% from these institutions, the multilateral institutions, to be able to do a debt restructuring, which will postpone all of the debt payments. So what was due now, they postpone out to 15, 20 years. So they didn't have to repay now. So they were able to keep all of that money in the coffers, as opposed to paying it out as the debts became due. Then they, when they did the debt restructuring, it allowed them to do that. Right? So here's it. That the government now has this so-called cheap money, borrowing these cheap loans at 1%. But then what the government did not tell the country, right? What the government did not tell the country in that borrowing this cheap money, these cheap loans, right? That something existed in the clauses of these loans, right? Something existed in the clauses of these loans, which is called a variable interest rate. So I can write it in the comments, right? A variable interest rate, right? So I want you saying it in the comments here. Right? A variable interest rate. So I put it up on the screen for everybody to see. So the cheap loans, again, remember you could go and reference all of this information, all of the economic spokespersons for the administration, all of them, even a couple of the members of parliament, often spoke about 1% loans and that the money was cheap. Money was cheap. So now this variable interest rate became a problem for the government of Barbados, because let me break down what the variable interest rate really is. So there's something called LIBOR, right? LIBOR, which is the international interest rate, or the London interbank, lending rate, basically. So if you know the little bit about the international financial system, I don't want to get too technical, but all of these loans were tied to the LIBOR rate. Like all of these loans that the administration borrowed was tied to the LIBOR rate, and it had a variable interest rate cost. So every time there's a shock, right? Every time there's a shock, and a shock is like COVID. A shock is when the ships decide to stop coming. A shock is the volcano from its invasion hitting Barbados, the ash. Okay. a shock is like um, every hospital had to start working just like that, and the government needs to look for a massive amount of money to go and repair that hospital right now, and suck significant resources into the economy to be able to pay for that immediately, right? So shock. So every time there's a shock, and your economy bubbling, trade wars, Trump, tariffs, um, recession, the stock market's crashing to a point, another financial crisis. Anytime there's a massive world shock, these institutions reserve the right? Reserve the right to increase the rate of interest on the country. Right? So all who has loans from these banks, country or not, they reserve the right now to increase the interest on you. Right? They have the rights to increase interest rates on you. So that is what is called variable. It varies. It is dependent on it's dependent on a shock. So when the shock happens, they reserve the right, as I say, to increase the interest cost on you to be able to recoup any money's lost, an investment, basically. So Barbados know, right? Barbados know has a problem with interest rates on these 1% loans increased to 400, but not 400, from 1% to 4%. The increase from 1% to 4% in one jump. So Barbados is not liable to pay that massive increase in interest payments because the cost of doing business has gone up because you had a shock to the world economy and the labor rate increase, and then the banks trigger the variable interest rate cost clause and send the cost on you. Right? So that is what Barbados is facing. Variable interest rate costs. Now, remember that Barbados was a country all along who had challenges, I would say, accessing finance on the international market at reasonable levels, right? So Barbados is expensive to do business. After the global financial crisis in 2008, after the global financial crisis in 2008, you had that banking crisis, and the banks basically slowed down on doing foreign direct investment. So all who can remember or NAFA, right? All who can remember or NAFA, I can say this and I can say it boldly, right? I believe that ONAFA had the best economic opportunity in Barbados, access to significant amounts of resources, foreign exchange, foreign direct investment, had it better than any other prime minister to be able to take Barbados to the next level. But I can say Barbados got sell out along the way, right? Barbados was sold out along the way in a very serious way too. So a bit of history quickly. Between the period when Erskine Sandyford was Prime Minister of Barbados and David Thompson was Minister of Finance, there was a bill table, or I don't want to say table, right? There was a bill put to these gentlemen called, and I'm going to type it in the comments, the IADB investment sector bill. Right. I put it in the comments for who interested, and I put it on the screen. The IADB investment sector bill. Right. Now this particular, and I can try to pull up the legislation that you can see. Okay. Now this particular bill was passed by UNAFA, but it was first introduced to Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandiford. Right? It was first introduced to Sir Lloyd Sandiford. So this investment sector bill is basically what gave rise to land in Barbados being sold for its highest value. Right? Land in Barbados being sold for its highest value. So this investment sector bill, which was chump changed by the way, just 33, $34 million, right? That piece of legislation allowed these big banks, these big institutions to come into Barbados in a serious way, right? And I'm gonna break it down for you. So here are these big institutions. Just remember, they say, oh, we need foreign direct investment, right? But really, what sectors in Barbados? If you look at it, right? If you look at it, Barbados don't have oil. Barbados don't have bauxite. Barbados don't produce anything of significance for export that would earn us foreign exchange. We had sugarcane and we swiped that. I think sugarcane was one of our most prosperous foreign exchange earners, but we swiped that off for services, right? So really, what could these sectors be? Right? So the real estate sector, the real estate sector. So this particular bill, the investment sector bill, heavily focused on the real estate sector, right? So, and you come these massive billions of dollars, passing through one half's hand, right? Billions passing through one half's hand, right? You see the emergence now of the South Coast. All of these hotels popping up on the South Coast between the period of 1994 and 2008. All the hotels popping up, all these big branded hotels popping up on the South and on the West Coast. Like, and many of the audience, a lot of you are older than me, so you could attest to when Barbados really started to change its physical infrastructure and started to look different. Really and truly between 1994 and 2008. So the hotels on the West Coast, the hotels on the South Coast, if you come inner, you had big developments like Westmoreland, and I know a lot of these golfing estates, right? You had something called an exempt surplus arrangement with Canada, right? An exempt surplus arrangement with Canada. So you had a lot of Canadian billionaires bringing companies to set up companies in Barbados, right? So one example, I don't know if you guys can remember a gentleman called Eugene Melnick, like Canadian big business investor, right? So the investment sector bill, not only the bill, but the bill was the core of it. The investment sector bill allowed for a lot of these big businesses to come and set up thereby bringing money and bringing jobs, right? In the private sector, and that basically was the emergence of Barbados's new age tourism product through the investment sector bill, a focus on real estate and commercial real estate, hotels, guest houses, villas, the upgrade of Sandy Lane, Westmoreland. We have some other plantation lands, some of the best agriculture lands, right? Investors were given these lands at next came to nothing. And then these big businesses came in and built houses next to a lot of like the poor people houses, right? Basically. So they put a lot of their big hotel estates and a lot of the houses which were on the coast, right? A lot of houses which were on the coast had massive increases in land tax bills because these big hotel investments next to you, so therefore know your land tax rates got to go up. So a lot of people sold the houses out on the coast and not selling them to the hotels that come next to them in the first place because they couldn't afford the raises in land tax, right? So then I hope you're understanding. So the government then turn around and institute land taxes in a serious way between that period and carry out the land taxes on many people who have land on the coast and nearby the coast, forcing people more inland, right? So as it was then, it kind of is now the same way. But trying to break it right down from an economic and financial perspective, so you see the different policies that were used to basically jig Barbados to where it is right now, right? So all the agriculture lands going, Bajans getting jobs in the hotels, bartenders, maids, cooks, the supervisors. It took a while for Barbadians to get to top level management positions in the tourist industry, but eventually it happened. So land zoning. This same investment sector bill allowed the government to change up some of the land zoning policies. Again, freeing up many lands that you couldn't build on and that people wouldn't dare build on. The government then gave a lot of investors who had money leeway to come and set up shop in Barbados. Again, to build that tourist industry and to also build the international business industry. The international business industry. So it had significant sums coming in from the international business sector, right? So you would have heard Minister Donald Innes around 2017, 18, quite about how $300 million was leaving the shores of Barbados every year, which was breaking the back of the government because Canada extended the exempt surplus arrangement to other countries outside of Barbados. So it was a benefit Barbados and Canada had, working hand in hand. So you see, even then, Barbados' Prime Minister had a good relationship with the Canadian Prime Minister, that they were able to sign that exempt surplus arrangement, and Barbados benefited significantly, again, from that exempt surplus arrangement, which saw Canadian banks, Canadian investment, Canadian horses, the energy sector, Canada, right? And the Canadian market really started to open up as a possible tourist market for Barbados then, right? So the investment sector bill, they allow many of the small hotels in Barbados to go to business, right? Because many of these hotels that were invited under the ONAFA period into Barbados were given tax concessions, tax-free import duties here, VAT free this, VAT free that, tax free this. So it was an unfair playing field, right? It was an unfair playing field for the local hoteliers to be competing with these big international hoteliers and these big international brands when the hoteliers and were allowed to import VAT free and tax free, etc., etc., etc. While local hoteliers had to be paying every single thing. Right? So you had the crashing of the local hotel sector, right, which essentially moved the revenue base for local hoteliers. The revenue base was then shipped overseas to these bigger hoteliers because the structure right now of our hotel sector, the hotels use a very tactful way of avoiding bringing money into Barbados. So if you book a hotel, chances are the money don't ever reach Barbados. The money has a holding company registered in Miami or somewhere in America. Right? And you have to do it online on the SWIFT system. Here it comes in, you have to do it online on the SWIFT system, by the CAR system. And the SWIFT system is mainly controlled by America and the same Bretton Woods institutions, right? So again, the SWIFT system, America coming back up again, right? Because every single point that I am bringing you back to America versus China, so you see what happened before and we didn't to know, right? So the investment sector bill again, right? When the government got access to this foreign direct investment, the government also used this foreign direct investment, which was on their books as income, right? In foreign exchange, right? Income, right? The government then turned around and borrowed some massive, 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 massive loans. Don't forget the contract for the prison was one of those big financial arrangements that was taken out under that time, and some other loans. So the government was racking up debt all along, foreign debt. Right? The government was racking up foreign debt all along, racking up foreign debt, racking up foreign debt, racking up foreign debt, racking up foreign debt, right? All along. So after the change in administration, now, right, most of the interest on the foreign debt that was borrowed under the IMF administration soon became due with the change in administration when David Thompson came in. And then on top of the financial crisis hitting Barbados, Barbados was then stretched for resources in that they had to be stretching here, there, over, trying to find money every couple of months to be paying off the debts that would have been borrowed by the UNAFA administration. Right? So if it was the government's policy at the time, they decided, right? If it was the government's policy at the time, they decided, well, look, we don't want to go on the international market to be borrowing no barrage of loans to prop up the economy. We don't want to be owing external sources, right? Owing external sources. So in order to get away from owing these external sources, we're going to owe internal sources, right? We're going to owe internal sources. So the government then started to borrow at a very rapid rate money from the central bank, money from the NIS, right? Our internal debt started to rack up at a very serious rate, right? Because then the government was really printing the money for wages. Right? So it increased treasury bills, the amount of money that was owed treasury bills, and the money is becoming due a little too fast, and etc. etc. Right? And then remember that the commercial banks had indicated at the time, right, that they were not showing any confidence. They were not showing any confidence in the economy between 2015 to 2018, really. So they're hardly investing. So as an economic policy tool, the government at the time sought to increase what you call the legal reserve requirement, right? The legal reserve requirement, and that reserve requirement is basically every bank in Barbados has to store X amount of cash with the central bank. It is a given. You have to store X amount of money at the central bank for safekeeping. So the legal reserve requirement allows the government to say to the banks, well, if the requirement for you is to store $10 million out of your assets with us, you don't have to store 15 million, or you don't have to store 20 million. So that automatically takes away from the operational capital of a bank. And then it has to be stored with the government, and the government using it for, whatever reasons they want to use it for. But remember, banks are for profit, and banks could go and invest in much riskier assets and get back the returns much quicker, as opposed to investing in government paper. Right? So here you have it. The Barbados economic system basically hamstrung from the inside and the outside. Can't really tap up the local debt so much. Right? Can't tap up the local debt so much. Then you can't go into the international market because it's so downgraded. Right? It's so downgraded. So default on the debt, boom, IMF program. Barbados was then led into a path of borrowing from the IMF, because remember, I just gave you all the pointers which brought you up to the point where now we are the IMF doors. Right? So then Barbados went and jumping head first and everything, borrowing all of these loans at cheap rates, cheap rates, cheap rates, cheap rates. IMF, World Bank, we get put on the IMF committee for this, the IMF committee for that, the World Bank committee for this, the World Bank committee for that. And we are now facing a situation where we are seeing the policymakers of Barbados, which is the head, which is the Prime Minister, going to the US Congress, right? Going to the US Congress to be presenting Barbados's economic profile to the US State Department. Sorry, right? To the US State Department. So a lot of Barbados's economic management, because of how in debt or indebted we are to and tied to the IMF program, right? A lot of Barbados's economic management has been transferred, to U.S. Secretary of State, where our leaders they have to go in and plead with the U.S. Secretary of State for economic reform. So that's the reason why you had a very strong initiative. That's the reason why the Prime Minister would have been arguing for decreases on the variable interest rates, and being in the U.S. State Department speaking to these persons is because Barbados now has a significant debt portfolio with the international community. So Barbados is over $3 billion US in debt between 2018 and now, which is over $6 billion US borrowed. Right? That's what was borrowed. That's not what existed before. That is what was borrowed, right? Between these couple of years. Now, it would have been admitted by the economic policymakers of Barbados that Barbados has to pay out at least $1 billion in interest for every year starting last year, and this will continue up to and set to increase 1 billion every year in interest exiting the country. Right? This is just interest on loans exiting the country. Every year, $1 billion of our resources, taxpayers' dollars, right? Remember, you don't have a government that into industrial manufacturing and have oil. We earn from taxes. So $1 billion of our taxes leaves the shores of Barbados to go back paying interest alone. So anytime there's a world shock or another economic crash, right, these variable rates can be increased. And therefore, it then requires countries to take resources to be able to afford the interest to the international world. Now remember some things. Huh? America is probably one of the largest contributors to the IMF. America is probably one of the largest contributors to the World Bank. But it is. The headquarters of the World Bank is based in America anyhow. Right? And America through the Bretton Woods institutions has significant state, and the Swiss system has significant state in terms of world global economic dominance. Right? I remember Barbados is a country now that is tied to the US dollar. Hence why, the strength of Barbados' economy is based on the 2 to 1 dollar peg. Right? The strength of the Barbados economy is based on that 2 to 1 dollar peg. So if you look at the IMF, try to get it in, IMF basket of currencies. If you look at the IMF basket of currencies, right? You would see a couple of currencies within the space, right? The IMF has a basket of currencies. Or so now the US dollar is the world dominant currency that most countries have to get US dollars to be able to do business, right? So the US, in a sense, benefit from almost every international transaction there is on the market, right? And with Barbados being tied to the US dollar, we have to earn US to be able to pay debts. You have to earn US to be able to buy oil, to give the merchants goods, for the merchants to have access to goods. We have to have access to foreign currency to be able to send remittances in and out to the country. That is basically the reason why we need foreign exchange US dollars into the Barbados economy. And the 2 to 1 dollar peg, right? The 2 to 1 dollar peg is a great thing for investment into the country because it's 2 to 1. Right? It is 2 to 1. So countries will use Barbados currency, or use Barbados, I should say, operate from Barbados, set up a holders company in Barbados, and use Barbados' foreign exchange to be able to do business on the global sphere. Right? So the increase in foreign exchange or US currency is not really for people like us, because remember, our economy is not dollarized. So we are not able to spend US dollars in our economy. Legally, I should say. Right? Legally, I should say. We are not allowed to spend US currency. So all of these reserves are not for you and I. It's not for workers. But the foreign exchange is set there for the big investors to use it to be able to buy their goods and services. So if you buy your goods and services chokehold is governing Barbados, you can then use that benefit to then get a preferable rate in your country. You hear Trump often speak about currency manipulation. So the strength of the Barbados dollars would allow the international market to do currency manipulation, and some of our regional brothers and sisters to do currency manipulation, right? So they will use Barbados as a hub, buy goods for all of their supermarkets, buy goods for buy cars, buy goods for many other different countries using Barbados's foreign exchange, right? And then have these goods shipped directly to the country, right? And have these goods shipped directly to the country, and Barbados never really benefiting from the good, although they use our foreign exchange, right? So Barbados through the currency peg, investors use Barbados to move money all around the world because of the stability of that peg, right? Now, the problem that Barbados, right, is facing right now, because we got to start to get over to the Chinese side, but I had to paint the American side to show you strategically first, right? So I was making a point about the IMF and the basket of currencies, right? So if you look on the basket of currencies, you'll realize that Barbados is up there when it comes to currency strength around the world. But what does a little country, 166 square miles, and according to Barack Jagdeo, what's so special about Barbados? Well, Barbados is not no big destination, you know. According to Jagdeo, he had that opinion. Now, not only does Barack Jagdeo have that opinion, but that opinion exists all around the world in the minds of some of these international bankers and some of these international people. How could a small matchbox country like Barbados be able to afford such a lavish lifestyle, having access to foreign exchange to buy almost any luxury good there is in the world? Meaning you can find almost any luxury good there is in the world right here in Barbados, right? So when I say luxury, many countries around the world do not have free education. Free education is a luxury afforded to Barbadians, sponsored by the state. Free healthcare, sponsored by the state. And subsidized garbage collection, subsidized water, subsidized electricity rates, right? All of these are luxuries paid and provided for by the state. But in reality, America does not enjoy most of these luxuries as a big industrial manufacturing country with trade pluses in the billions, right? With billions on their accounts in foreign exchange to spend. Right? China don't have it. So Barbados is the envy of the world, being a country who really has no natural resources, right? No natural resources. So you see now the reason why the tax system in Barbados is built in the way that it is built in, and the taxes are as high for that particular reason, because the taxes allow the government and the state to be able to pay to maintain the lavish lifestyle of the people. So to be able to walk into a supermarket and to see 10 different brands of cornflakes, um, 10 different brands of Skittles, 10 different brands of fruit snacks, 10 different brands of all types of goods, which do not exist in Barbados and were never manufactured in Barbados, right? Many countries around the world who have natural resources, right? are still not able to achieve what Barbados was able to achieve. And the level of attainment the average Barbadian would achieve on a global scale. Many countries around the world are still trying to figure out what this little small country is doing and did so well that its people are able to be so intelligent and, uplifting themselves to that pinnacle. Right? So you can see strategically the decay along the way. We're not gonna get into that tonight. Right? How they're chipping away and picking away all these luxuries. Not again that tonight. No, I told you all of that to say that Barbados, our hands started to become tight when it became access to finance. In terms of access to finance, right? On the international scale, we come to be able to do things, right? Remember, Barbados' debt problem didn't start in 2008. Barbados' debt problem started with ONAFA, right? FYI, did you know that at least 4 of the international loans that were restructured during the debt restructuring were loans that were borrowed by the ONAFA administration, right? And out of this day, I don't think any of the government officials ever admitted to the country if they restructured that loan to VICO to build the prison. Because that was one of the loans that was choking Barbados $30 million every month. And I don't know if the administration ever admitted to the public that they restructured the prison loan to VICO. Right? So most of those loans that were restructured were ONAFA's loans. Right? Probably 1 or 2 from the secular time, you know. But yeah. So here Barbados is hamstrung really and truly. No major productive capacity. Barbados been doing business on the American system. Every so often you're having a financial crisis. Ever so often the country having to run to the IMF, country having a currency peg, the country having to import majority of its goods from America, right? Between 2007 to 13, you then saw the emergence of the Chinese Communist Party, right? The Chinese Communist Party, with a different outlook on politics and global politics, right? So here's it, politics started to change, the global financial crisis happening, nobody willing to lend money around the world, foreign direct investment drying up, the exempt surplus arrangement getting extended to other countries, capital flow taking place all over, economies crashing, running hot. The emergence now of the Chinese Communist Party providing alternate financing to countries through the Chinese Exim Bank, right? The Chinese Exim Bank. So many persons may not be aware, but it was the Democratic Labour Party. It was the Democratic Labour Party who really and truly furthered the relationship with China more so than the Barbados Labour Party. Right? It was more so the DLP who favored and pushed a relationship with China more so the BLP. And the evidence is there to show, eventually Sir Lloyd Sandiford was appointed as an ambassador to China, and you see it reflected in the investments that the Chinese put into Barbados through the Exim Bank, leading up to that period, or leading through that period, right? Yes, people, don't forget to like and share. I mean, I'm bringing it out tonight, I'm bringing out some good information. So I would like you guys to like and share, like and share, like and share. We're having a class tonight, people. So like and share. It's always good when we have more people in, so the discussion will get more interesting. But just let me know that it's still with me. Give me a comment, give me a like, give me a share, and get some other people in this conversation because we're telling the economic truth tonight. Right. So as Pedro said, with the emergence of Obama and the Democratic Party in America, the Democratic Party in America had significant ties with the Chinese Communist Party in China. Right. And then with the emergence of David Thompson, who had a very good relationship with Barack Obama and the Democratic Party in America, formulated some relationships. The Chinese Exim Bank invested heavily in America. The Chinese government actually bought up significant treasury bills. And China has a very large debt portfolio. China has a very large debt portfolio owning America's debt. Right? Owning America's debt. So I'm a bit conflicted how the Chinese are allowed to massively increase investment into the US by buying up significant amounts of American debt. And then on the other hand, some people would tell you don't do business with China. Don't do business with China. Right? No, this is where it gets interesting. So remember the Democratic Party in America for Obama's time, and then in comes with a change of government, and Obama stepped down. You had the emergence of the Republican philosophy and Donald Trump. Right? The Republican philosophy and Donald Trump. So the Republican philosophy through Donald Trump is saying that China is leeching off the American economy. Right? Leeching off the American economy. As I said, China is buying up American debt. China is investing in countries through what they call bilateral treaties. So China is going around providing debt diplomacy to Africa. Right? So all through Africa, the Chinese investing through the Exim Bank, they could own ports, and through the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese were able to secure trade routes and shipping routes, global shipping routes, logistics routes, and having access to global trade in a serious way. So you will hear Trump come on and say he's putting $1 million. He's putting $1 million on Chinese ships which use US ports. That's because Chinese ships do majority of the logistics, do majority of the moving. And Donald Trump is saying, right? Because remember, we're dealing with the first Trump administration, or we're dealing with this one yet, right? Because all the world, the Chinese still they're doing debt diplomacy, right? So Barbados got a couple of investments from China under the DLP. Sam Lords, and a couple of others, some other stuff. Like Chinese Exim Bank lending the government money because financing really wasn't available in the world, and the Chinese were lending money at favorable rates. Right? We can do a show on Chinese lending practices at some point. Right? So the government borrowing Chinese financing projects that would actually help. Right? So investing in agriculture, took up residency in BA, DMC, they're investing in housing, roads, you would call social goods. Like social goods. So the Chinese did a lot of investing in social goods. And if you can remember, David Thompson had more a social philosophy right, in terms of tackling social issues. So that was a good match, right? The David Thompson philosophy, based off his right, based off his rhetoric, was more socially oriented. And here the Chinese, right, providing social spending at an okay rate, and hardly anybody else in the world want to lend you some money, right? So you see how easy it was for Barbados to walk to the Chinese, because the American system, or the American favor system, started to pull back. It started to pull back its financing, right? So China now coming in, diving, right? China was not able to get a currency strong like the US, right? But China was able to get in and dominate the trade system, right? Trading, so shipping. So a lot of US manufactured goods, right? So iPhone, Apple, WhatsApp, Samsung, y'all can name it, right? A lot of the clothing stores, Nike, so many of these companies migrated to China under the Democratic Party, right? So many of them migrated, right? Migrated to China, right? And that business migration, right? That business migration to China from America allowed American companies to set up companies in China and manufacture goods in China at heavily subsidized rates, cheap labor. I remember the Chinese currency was a very weak currency as well. All the different breaks and benefits that American businesses got from moving from America over to China. Trump came in and said that this is a ripoff. So what was happening is, or what happens is, right, and this is where now I can put some lashes on the Barbadian officials for not telling the people of this country the truth with this tariff, US tariff business, right? Now, what is happening is that Trump is saying, look, I am putting all of these tariffs on China. Right? I am putting all of these tariffs on China because China has a trade deficit with us, meaning that we import over 400 and something $1 billion in goods, or 400 or something, like $4 in goods. Meanwhile, the US only exports 40 billion in goods, right? So China, because remember the US is China's biggest source market for Chinese made goods, right? So Trump is saying, well, realistically, the US doesn't send that many goods to China. We send some goods, but y'all are not our biggest market, but we are your biggest market. So you are sending your cheap manufactured goods made by US companies, right? You are sending your cheap Chinese manufacturing goods to America, which are really and truly American companies which migrated across to operate under your benefit structure. Like, so the Apple, the gadgets, the this, the that, all of these things that are made in China are really American companies, operating on the Chinese system. You are sending these goods to America on Chinese ships, who then use American ports, right, to then distribute goods all over the world. So when you go on Amazon, and when you go on this Temu and Tempu and Alibaba and these sites, right, you go and look all around the products in your house, you see made in China, made in China, made in China, right? You see made in China. But really and truly, a lot of these goods are shipped from ports like Miami and other ports that ship to Barbados. But really and truly, they ship Chinese manufacturing goods and not American manufactured goods. Right? I can go over that one again. You go over that one again. Right? Under the Democratic Party in America, the Chinese Communist Party, the policies they had allow for a seamless and smooth migration of America's manufacturing. Right? America's manufacturing. Right? So America's productive capacities were set up in China. Were set up in China. So America lost jobs, America lost income, America lost all of these things with the closing down of factories and everything moving over to China to operate on China's benefit system. So the return of manufacturing cheap goods and in abundance, right, will give you that significant earning power that you need if you manufacture them in China, right? So these American companies that set up shit in China allows for these really cheap, these really cheap products that are being shipped from China, but are really actually American products made in China that are being shipped, right? That are being shipped to America. And then when you go on to these sites to buy goods and services from America, you think that you're buying American products, but if you look on them, they're really saying made in China, right? So when the government officials, right, when the government officials come on, right, and say that the tariffs are going to impact Barbados and trade, and they're going to be the increased cost of living, they are using this situation as an excuse to allow the business owners to increase profits, profit margins. That is all this is, right? That is all this is, because with Trump's tariff system, right? With Trump's tariff system, a lot of these businesses that went into China and set up, Trump are offering them incentives to come back home, make America great again, MAGA, come back home, bring back home manufacturing, bring back home the jobs, bring back home the technology, bring back home the intellectual capacity, and build up America's economy. Right? That is what Trump is saying from my estimation and from the way how I understand it. Right? So really and truly, if you look at the tariff system that Trump put on Barbados, Trump is saying, well, look, all imports into the United States, right? All imports into the United States, we hit y'all with a 10% tariffs coming from Barbados. Ask yourselves the question, who really exports goods to the US from Barbados? Who? The elite, right? The elite business, right? The elite business structures. They're the ones who manufacture and export, right? So you have to be earning a certain amount of money to be able to afford it and make it possible to export. So I heard about pepper sauce and rum and all those things that, right? Pepper sauce and rum and stuff, those things that, Barbados will export. But let's just say that Barbados exports $100 million a year in goods to the United States. A 10% tariff will be 10 million, right? 10 million. So an extra $10 million a year, you really feel you can kill the government? Just estimating. But I don't even believe the export bill in Barbados is significant enough that any 10% increase on Barbados' exports to the US is a very negligible amount and not significant enough to cause any serious shock in the Barbados economy. And there he said it. Right? Because remember, the goods we import are majority Chinese goods, although we get them from America. Right? So here's the opportunity now for Barbados to actually import American manufactured goods. For when these companies come back and actually set back a shop, and what make it even better, even in the state of Mississippi, Trump just dropped taxes. Don't have to pay taxes anymore in the state of Mississippi. Right? So remember, Trump is a businessman, business-minded, right? Business-minded in the way he's seeing it, not necessarily political or politician, but he's seeing it from the perspective of value earned. Right? So he understands the strategic and global power that Barbados has. Now, if you look, right, at the stock market, some of the same companies that are based in China, American companies that are based in China, right, but are listed on the US stock exchange, those are the companies that are doing bad on the stock exchange. Those are the companies that are doing bad on the stock exchange. So the Chinese economy is actually taking a significant hit. Right? So there's the opportunity opening up for Barbados, because remember, if Trump put on the tariffs on the ship, remember these ships that are leaving China are coming to the Caribbean now, like they're gonna pass that cost on to us. So if we continue importing these Chinese, these American-made Chinese products from these different ports in America using these ports, they're gonna pass the cost on to us, and that is how you will possibly see an increase. Right? So if Barbados joins hand in hand, right? If Barbados joins hand in hand in saying, well, look, we're gonna stick it out with China, we're gonna continue to buy these Chinese manufacturing goods. Well, we're gonna have to pay the cost of the $1 million, we're gonna have to pay the extra tariff, and we're gonna have to pay all of these extra things that Trump are gonna put on because of Barbados's policy choices. Right? So don't be misled, don't be fooled, don't be tricked by these politicians that are saying that Barbados set to be destroyed and Trump's policy is so bad and it's going to collapse this and collapse that. It only collapses persons who are on the Chinese trade route or influenced by the Chinese trade route, who are on the value chain of the global Chinese trade route. It impacts those countries. But the countries that are not necessarily buying those goods, right, that may seek to, fully integrate themselves with trading with American companies under Trump's policies, there is a possibility that you could get whatever bargains, whatever Trump has available for you as a country. Remember, he said that. Remember, Trump said that many countries pick up the phone to call him. They don't want to do business with America because of Trump's tariff system. Right? So, yeah. So, Barbados now has an opportunity, right, strategically, to chart a new future for itself. Right? A new future for itself. Right? Barbados has the opportunity now to chart a new future for itself. Now, what has been happening strategically, right? What has been happening strategically in Barbados? I don't know if you guys were paying serious attention, but Y'all can remember when exercise trade winds came to Barbados, right? Exercise trade winds came to Barbados. Exercise trade winds, which saw the American government come down to Barbados and do their trade winds exercise. So they told me that it happens ever so often. It, like, they said it happens ever so often, right? So let me get a picture here. So I remember that me and I know probably some of my people in St. John could attest to this, but many times we were up in St. John and those helicopters were seriously flying over the country, you know, flying over the country in the way, and we label it as a dominance exercise, a power exercise where the US will come and show its strength, right? US will come and show its strength by, right? So it says here, exercise trade winds kicks off in Barbados. Like exercise trade winds. So it says that with the participation of 1,200 troops from 36 different nations, exercise trade winds kicked off officially in Barbados on Saturday, 4th of May. The annual military exercise is being hosted by the Barbados Defense Force and the United States Southern Command with an aim to enhance, big word, so don't want to embarrass myself. So it says interoperability, to enhance interoperability and readiness among allied forces, an ultimate goal of ensuring security for the ICC World Cup. Right? So the head of the Paragon Base Chief of Staff, Commodore Mr. Sherlin, this is what he had to say about trade winds. So he said exercise trade winds is a clear demonstration of enhanced cooperation and readiness among partner nations in safeguarding the Caribbean against evolving threats. He said, indeed, the value of exercise trade winds has been realized time and time again, and this year's exercise is particularly timely in assisting us for preparation for the World Cup. Right? That is what they say. But you can clearly see, and we know from being geopolitical students and students of politics on the global landscape, anytime a country chooses to flex military power in a foreign state, that it is usually a message to some other global power, right? To some other global power. And since Barbados went to a republic around November of 2021, the British, right? The British government was saying that Barbados could now be called Little China. That Barbados should really be called Little China. Right? That is what was said in the British Parliament. Right? So Barbados party raised with Queen Elizabeth, who was the monarch, and we had a governor general, and the governor general was the office was made redundant, and we had the first president being Sandra Mason. right? So coming out of that exercise, the British parliamentarians and some others then proceeded to say that Barbados traded the Queen in England for an emperor in Beijing. Barbados traded the Queen of England, right? The Queen of England for an emperor in Beijing, right? So here is this article by the Diplomat, right? And it says Barbados's new republic, a win for China? Question mark. And it says centering Barbados's decision to end ties with the British monarchy around China only underscores the problem. The UK's lack of interest in Barbados and similar countries. Right? And it says on the 30th of November 2021, the island of Barbados parted ways with the British monarch, thus ending their 400-year relationship. A few months on, the incumbent government won a landslide election. How were these events connected, and what role, if any, did China play? Now, the Barbados government first revealed the clearly very popular plan to remove Queen Elizabeth as the head of state and make Barbados a republic. I don't know how popular that was, but that's what they're saying. In her speech, the then Governor General Sandra Mason, and now Barbados' first ever president, focused solely on the relationship with the UK, stating that it was time for Barbados to leave our colonial past behind. Mason framed the move as the ultimate statement of confidence in who we are and what we are capable of achieving. While this auspicious occasion was heralded by many as a seminal moment, others wondered if it was more about another country, and that is China. Right? It then went on to say that Tom Tugendhat, the chair of the UK's Foreign Affairs Committee, asserted that China has been using infrastructure investment and debt diplomacy as a means of foreign control in Barbados and elsewhere. According to Tugendhat, some islands seem to be close to swapping a symbolic queen in Windsor for a real and demanding emperor in Beijing, and his concerns were reiterated in an article in the UK Sunday Times entitled Little England? Not anymore. Barbados is becoming Little China, insinuating that the Caribbean island was merely trading one colonial master for the other. Meanwhile, Barbados' Prime Minister expressed her disdain that such countries as Barbados are seen as pawns rather than countries with equal capacity to determine our destiny. She further remarked that the Caribbean is no different to the entire world in seeking to boost economic activity with China. So the question asks, so who was right? Although Barbados has one of the highest per capita incomes in the region, and as a small island, the country is sorely in need of stronger, sustainable economic relationships. Well, this part is not facts, but it says COVID decimated tourism, leading the government to introduce plans for a universal basic income, which is a World Economic Forum policy, in order to reduce inequality and high levels of unemployment. So it goes on to say that in colonial times, Barbados was incredibly important an incredibly important country to the British Empire. Slave harvested sugar, right, was from the island was worth more to Britain than all of the metal stolen by the Spanish Empire in Latin America. And that is the same point that I made earlier, that sugar cane is really the food that give Barbados its standing in the world. But we got rid of sugar cane, and the state of the sugar industry right now should tell you a lot. Right? The state of the sugar industry right now should tell you a lot. And at some point, I really like to get economist Anthony Wood. I really like to get economist Anthony Wood on this show at some point in time to extensively discuss the state of the sugar industry, right? Because we tend to go by what sounds fancier, right? But sugar was the most lucrative industries for Barbados, right? So people will often brag about moving out to the cane fields to work in the service industry, and whatever. People were proud at the time to move away from the sugar canes to become educated. Right? And nothing is wrong with becoming educated, but we educated a country full of workers, not people who could economically produce for the country for local consumption or export consumption. We produce graduates who need to be employed within one of these large scale imported businesses. So anytime a big company comes in, a Barbados, hiring people, Sandals, all of these different companies, we will run and go and get jobs. Our system educates us for jobs like that, right? But the trick was, right? I don't know what to say it was a trick, because to say it's a trick was not like I'm going after any person. I'm not going after any particular person, so I don't want to say it was a trick. But where we fell down is that we turned ourselves out of manufacturing and production and sales to become service people, to work in a corporation for $400, as opposed to staying in the cane fields producing canes, right, for export to earn foreign exchange. We would rather go and take a singular job in a hotel or so to earn $400 a week. But I digress. Similar to World Health, not World Health, World Trade Organization statistics, the UK was Barbados' third most important export destination. In net worth, $35 billion. By that figure, by 2019, that figure was just under $9 billion. So the UK's exports to Barbados consistently larger than imports throughout, right? Meaning that Barbados ran a consistent trade deficit with its former colonizer. Right? So here you have the word coming back up again, trade deficit. So Barbados ran trade deficits with almost every country in the world. All these major countries, colonial countries. So we run a trade deficit with the UK, we run a trade deficit with Canada, we run a trade deficit with the US, we run a trade deficit with China. So Barbados is a price taker all around, because we do not produce anything significant enough, right, for export that we could really be a shot caller in the world and in the grand scheme of things, because we control nothing in the economy. The global economy control nothing, right? And our capacity on the global scale renders us impotent to really institute global change. So yes, you can have a mouthpiece speaking at the UN, and you can have a mouthpiece making all these speeches all over wherever. But as you can see, that mouthpiece has just been running its mouthpiece, and nothing is happening significantly, especially on a global level, because it's a different playing field now, where the rules are skewed in favor of the larger industrial countries, the G7, the G8, the G20 countries, not little Barbados. Right? So I was finishing this article here, right? So it says that Barbados runs these trade deficits with the UK, its former colonizer. Investment, particularly foreign direct investment, is disappointing. Not only from Barbados to the UK, but British influence to Barbados are significant versus those of others. Right? So the British, being a colonial power, propped us up significantly because we were a British colony, we were a British subject, right, up until independence. So Alvaro went up to England, and the Constitution of Barbados, or what they considered to be a constitution, was really an act of parliament in the United Kingdom. Right? So the Barbados Act, right? The Barbados Act was passed in the United Kingdom Parliament, right? Which really truly then allowed Barbados to become an independent country for internal self-government, right? For internal self-government. That is what was the independence experience initiated by Barrow, which he negotiated with the British. Now, many people would say Barrow fought for independence. I quite frankly would not use that word fought. I would say negotiated, because it really wasn't a fight. Like, more negotiation for independence. So then we were allowed to set up a society, an independence economy, based off inflows from the colonial power, which meant that after the independence period, we mainly had two political parties, the BLP and the DLP, which were already a true. Well, the BLP was formed in 1937, and then the Ds were more formed like more around in 1960s or so. But they're really actually one was the Bs were like mainly like the party of the colonialists, right? So it was a very minute space. So the party emerged during the colonial era. So that is why I made that comment. Fast forward now, the formation of the DLP. The DLP came and instituted independence. So I would consider the DLP to be the Independence Party of Barbados, right? So you only had those two administrations all along in Barbados, and we continue to maintain the same external relationships all along, right? So there wasn't much of a difference. So it could have been Tom Adams, it could have been Al Barrow, it could have been Bree St. John, Fernando Stuart, David. It didn't make a difference. All of our external partners basically remain as they are. UK maintained its presence. Many people continue to migrate to the UK, continue to send back remittances. Many tourists fly down, and then I'm not just talking about average tourists, no, but the elite of the elite still utilize Barbados from out to the UK, right? So now, here is it, Barbados going to a republic and being accused now of switching out its British hierarchy for Chinese hierarchy. Again, being accused by, let me get his name right, Ted, the guy from the United Kingdom Foreign Affairs Council, right? So out goes the British. We no longer have a British head of state, but we have a Barbadian head of state now, right? And I am believing that, right, I am believing that with Barbados no longer being a, because remember, before we had the Belgian Barbados passport, most Barbadians were British subjects, meaning that they had a British passport, right? They had a British passport. After independence, because I saw these British passports, some two ways, some want two ways, you know. So then this British passport allowed for a much easier traverse between the two of these countries, right? After independence, that was completely changed, and now Barbadians have a Barbadian passport, right? And we were able to negotiate visa-free travel to, right, visa-free travel to many different spaces around the world, UK being one of them. So it's very easy for Barbados and Barbadians to fly into the UK. Right? Remember, it was Albaro and Albaro that put Barbados into the Organization of American States, the OAS. Right? If you go and research the history of the Organization of the American States, you will clearly see that the Albaro and the early DLP would have set up that organization and facilitated Barbados's membership into that organization. Previously, Barbados was a member of the West Indies Federation under Grantley Adams, and that crumbled. It didn't last very long. And then with the establishment of the DLP, and fast forward a bit of years, Barbados then entered into the Organization of American States. Right? So fast forward. Let's say Barbados now joining up the World Trade Organization, etc. Right? Agreeing to follow the WTO rules, etc. And this is one thing, you know, that I must admire the on AFA period for. When it came to reducing duties and reducing trade barriers for the international world to be importing their goods, exporting their goods into Barbados and other small countries, they want to remove all import duties and taxes on their goods coming into our economies. I'm going to repeat that. Through the World Trade Organization rules, they want to tax. They want us to remove the taxation on their goods coming into our economies, right? Not understanding that the taxation received from taxing those imports go to building up and benefiting the country. No, how sustainable is that for Barbados if we remove these import duties and stuff on these European made goods, right, against these European made goods and some of these other goods that are being favored by the WTO? If you remove the duties on them, then they now compete with your domestic economy. They then compete with your people who have to be paying for inputs and taxed, while the larger WTO countries are allowed in tax-free. Right? So even if we remove our tax, they're still not going to remove theirs, right? And if they do remove the tax on us for exporting to their countries, try to do business with one of the international countries and try to import into their space and see what happens. All of a sudden, you don't meet international standards, You don't have the money to compete on their level. They institute all types of rules and regulations that you know have to meet. And they make the process so long and grueling and hard and frustrating for countries to import their goods into their economy. And you eventually get hamstrung. So you go ahead and you destroy your local manufacturing capacity in favor of imports. And they're saying, well, you could export to our country. But then they set up the barriers, then block you from exporting and earning money. So then you're hamstrung now. And you're fully dependent on these organizations because it destroyed your own internal capacity. And now you have to depend on them. Right? So Barbados is in a situation right now, right? So we're coming up at 9 o'clock, so this is the final stretch. So Barbados is in a predicament right now where Putin, right? Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping of China, Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, the leaders of Mali and Niger, like him or not, Donald Trump, like him or not, Javier Milei of Argentina, and I'm also seeing a bits of it from the guy Bukli from Nayib Bukli from El Salvador, right? And somebody said Erdogan from Turkey, right? Now, the thing about these particular leaders, and particularly in this time, right? The United States is seeking to reclaim dominance and to reclaim trade markets and reclaim source markets. So because of the US pulling back significantly, China was allowed to gain significant growth in terms of bilateral relations and investment into other economies and countries. And these countries changed up some of their policies to more fit and suit the Chinese global trade route on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, right? So Putin is helping out Traore to rid himself of the noose necks around Burkina Faso. Um, but Barbados will have to choose very soon. Right? Because, as I said, America is really starting to step up its ability to reclaim territory. So, remember when Trump was in place in his first administration, they actually went to invade Venezuela, right? And when Trump went to invade Venezuela, then you had Russian fighter jets landing right here in Venezuela, right? So look at our Caribbean brother and sister Trinidad. Trinidad has something called a Dragon Gas deal, and through the United States, be Chevron's head office and the ordeal, the license was cancelled, and therefore Trinidad cannot benefit from the Dragon Gas deal to buy oil and gas from Venezuela. The same way ONAFA had the ability to sign the Petro Caribbean deal with Venezuela, which would have given Barbados the opportunity to buy oil and gas much cheaper than it is right now, right? Uh, he didn't. ONAFA didn't sign that Petro Caribbean deal with Venezuela, right? And remember, ONAFA had a very good relationship with George Bush, who happened to be a Republican at the time, right? So many countries across the Caribbean signed that Petro Caribbean deal, and went ahead and followed alternate foreign policies as it relates to securing their country's futures and doing business um, with countries that were even outlawed, like Cuba, where now many Caribbean countries are under pressure for doing business with Cuba through the medical program, right? And Trump sending Marco Rubio to the Caribbean, and Caribbean governments came under pressure for having Cuban medical professionals in their countries, etc., etc. Right? Now, Barbados is a country that operates under the One China policy. Right? The One China policy. And the One China policy means that China believes that China and Taiwan is one landmass. Right? So the same way Venezuela believes that the Essequibo region in Guyana is theirs, the Chinese believe that Taiwan is theirs. Right? And China would want to annex Taiwan as part of, you know, their armory. So this thing about annexing countries is a very interesting feature popping up in the global political economy now, right? Because remember, you heard Trump come to the public and said he would love to annex Canada to make Canada, I can't remember how many states the states have, but he would like to make it the next state of the United States. Now, there's a reason for that, right? When Trump institutes these tariffs, right, these ships will need somewhere to go. And the next biggest, right, the next biggest source market, thank you for the interjection, the 51st state. Yes, Trump said he would love to make Canada the 51st state of America. And there's a reason why he said it. Now, he said it because after he implements these tariffs, the Chinese and others are going to find means and ways to try to get around these tariffs. And they will seek out the next biggest source market of their goods who are not willing to charge them the same tariffs and rates like the Americans. Right? So the Chinese can't do business with South America nor Central America because through the Monroe Doctrine, right? I don't know how many of you follow your political history so deep, but there's something called the Monroe Doctrine, which was instituted by President James Monroe in America, right? Which was set up or put in place to stop foreign forces from setting up shit, right? By setting up shit in South America. So it was mainly targeted at the Europeans then. So the Americans, right, through the James Monroe Doctrine, and you guys can put it up on social media anytime you wish, but let me put it in the documents, right? So they set up, they can't go into South America, can't go into Central America because it's all America. And Trump will come. So what is the next best option that is close, large enough, big source market, stable economy, has good ties, friendly links with the Chinese Communist Party? Next best option is Canada, right? Canada. Let me put it in. Right. The Monroe Doctrine. So the next best place is Canada, right? So Trump is saying, he didn't say it openly, but I'm telling you, Trump's threat to annex Canada as the 51st state is a means to block off the Chinese from accessing an alternate market for the goods and services that they're going to move out of America because of the tariffs. So Trump is playing a big boy strong arm move and saying, well, we're going to take Canada if you move those ships from here and refuse to pay our tariffs and refuse to do business and build the American economy, and you want to take the loot and run to Canada. We have enough power that we could annex Canada and you're still back at square one. So if you don't want to do business with Canada, you'll find yourself back out this region, and this region meaning from Greenland, Canada, America, Central America, the Caribbean Basin, and South America. This entire hemisphere from South America straight back up to the top of America, Canada, Greenland. America sees it as its jurisdiction that it needs to maintain peace and security at all times. So the same way, right? The same way Putin believes that Ukraine should not be encroaching within its realm, America believes that foreign powers, especially world powers with nuclear capacity, should not be hovering or setting up shop and setting up all these infrastructures, setting up all of these bases, taking over agriculture, being influencing governments. Like, this does not sit well with America, right? This does not sit well. So the American government is reinstating its global power and trying to reclaim territories and source markets that the Chinese has taken over through its Belt and Road Initiative and through investment in the Chinese Exim Bank. And the Americans have responded with an American Exim Bank. An American Exim Bank. So here you have it now. And I'm going to look for it. America Exim Bank. Okay. So America is responding with Exim Bank to be able to roll back some of the good work that the Chinese were able to do in terms of investing. So I'm trying to find found it. So here you have it now. Right? This is gonna be a very interesting story for you to see here that I want to put up. Right. So I was saying something about the global powers, right? So America is not comfortable with China having all of these bases, all of these countries, because at the end of the day, America sees it as China encroaching further and further into them, where they could set up missile launching bases to be able to attack the US military system at any time. So it is very valuable to China to have strategic military power around strategic points where at any time they could invade the US. So showing military might is also an option to be able to achieve global dominance, right? So if the Chinese were allowed to set up in countries all through the Caribbean, set up bases all through the Caribbean, where they have easy access to move in and out and up and down all through the Caribbean. They could then go over to Central America and Nicaragua. They could go to Venezuela and Guyana and set up missile pads in all of these countries and strategically aim all of their nuclear missiles at the United States. So do you see why strategically why the Americans would be opposed significantly to the Chinese gaining serious foothold into the Caribbean, Central America, South America. Because it's very easy to invade, and overrun when you don't gotta go all back to China to shoot a missile. No, you can come and set up missile pass very close and get to America quick. Meanwhile, if you check out America's foreign policy, you could just check out again through under Barack Obama, the expansion of America's military bases out through Africa, etc., to show America's strength. Still, boom. So, Ukraine war, Russia wants to annex Ukraine. China didn't really get involved because at some point China will want to annex. Taiwan. The Caribbean is so divided that Barbados supports a one China policy, but St. Vincent supports and recognizes Taiwan. St. Lucia recognizes and supports Taiwan, but Barbados doesn't. Barbados supports one China policy. Right? So what you're seeing exactly based on the foreign policy level, strategically how Barbados is set up on the chessboard. Now, what you can see here, covering the last 15, and I want to get some comments so we can go over time tonight. But it says here, Export-Import Bank of US signs $800 million memorandum of understanding with Barbados and St. Kitts and Nevis governments to support strategic investments. Right? To support strategic investments. So here it says that the Exim president and chair Rita Joe Lewis joins Prime Minister Mia Mottley and Prime Minister Terence Jew for a MOU signing ceremony in Bridgetown. And it says for immediate release. Bridgetown, Barbados. The Export-Import Bank of the United States President today signed two significant memoranda of understanding with the government of Barbados and St. Kitts, securing a total of $800 million in potential financing support to support financing in cybersecurity, renewable energy, and critical areas for the region's long-term growth and sustainability. These agreements are a symbol of the US's deepening partnership with Barbados and the entire Eastern Caribbean region, said the chair. And the agreement sends a signal to the market that Exim is eager to finance meaningful projects that support new business opportunities in key sectors across the United States and the Eastern Caribbean. This is what strategic partnerships between the US and our key allies look like. So the MOU between the US Exim Bank and the government of Barbados is in the amount of up to $500 million in financing. And that was signed by the chair, Lewis, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and the US Ambassador Roger Nyhus. Areas for cooperation and procurement included renewable energy, cybersecurity, water and sanitation, and maritime domain awareness. Right? So the US Embassy in Bridgetown is proud to have played a leadership role in making these agreements possible, said the US Ambassador to the Eastern Caribbean and the OECS. Now, yeah. So what you guys see here, a picture of the, right, there's a picture of the chief policymaker of Barbados and the head of the US Exim Bank, US Import Export Bank. Here you have a picture now of the different various ministers, the US ambassador, etc., etc., etc. Right. So this is the picture of the St. Kitts Prime Minister now, doing his thing. Right. Now, I saw an article today which says that China hits back. China hits back with new payment system idea to immune itself, or we call recession-proof its economy. Now, let me say this. Remember, I spoke to you guys last week about the payment system, which is SWIFT, right? The SWIFT payment system. So Barbados, through the African Exim Bank, right? I remember the United States is on record with documentation coming out to the United States which shows opposition to the African Exim Bank, right? Now, the African Exim Bank and the Chinese Exim Bank is very much almost in tandem, right? They're very much in tandem. Now, I don't want to go as far as to say that the African Exim Bank is like a offshoot of the Chinese Exim Bank. I don't want to go as far as to say that, but the African Exim Bank is not far removed from the Chinese Exim Bank, right? So the PAP system, this new payment system, which will switch your currency transactions off the SWIFT system and onto the PAP system, this Pan-African payment system. If you're going to do the history of the research and see how it's funded, then you would understand why the US would show opposition to it and having it set up in this part of the hemisphere, right? So support for the African Exim Bank is almost like support direct and a direct endorsement, right? A direct endorsement for China. Not, it's almost like, it's not quite, but it's almost like an endorsement for China and the one China policy, because this bank strategically being sponsored by this Pan-African PAP system, this African Exim Bank will essentially set up the structures in place to be able to shift Barbados onto a fully digital currency and away from US dollar trade. Right? So remember, the representative from the African Exim Bank came on and said that this bank is set up to help reduce reliance on the US dollar. That is the utmost rubbish. Hey, as of now, the US dollar is still the dominant currency in the world. The Chinese yen is still not featured as an official recognized currency to do business in anywhere in the world, right? You don't go and buy stuff and say, well, give me Chinese dollars. You will take US money, right? So with the emergence of these new payment systems to cut down the transactions of SWIFT and the African Exim Bank being put there structurally to help advise Barbados to move on this SWIFT system, to move on the PAP system and move away from the SWIFT system and relax on the US dollar. It will take Barbados a lot of years to be able to achieve that, and I personally do not think that the US government, particularly Donald Trump, if Donald Trump is in, I do not think Donald Trump will sit and allow the African Exim Bank to set up shop as constructed, because it then allows, and if you read the charter of the African Exim Bank, it allows persons from other countries, right? And these are countries that Barbados does not have diplomatic relationships with. So Barbados has diplomatic relationships with some of the African countries, some European countries, etc. So for example, with the presence of the bank, if somebody from Iran or Iraq or one of these terrorist countries come here on the orders of the African Exim Bank, the government can't block them per se. But let me rephrase that. The government can't block them because the charter of the African Exim Bank, which was passed in the Parliament of Barbados, right, which was passed in the Parliament of Barbados, right, and it needs to be told to the people of this country when it was passed, right, it needs to be told when it was passed. That particular charter allows people to move in and out of Barbados, and Barbados doesn't have to have diplomatic relationships with them. So, for example, if we had a problem with the Russians coming to Barbados, if one of the Russians or somebody coming through this bank, they have full diplomatic immunity. They have full diplomatic immunity to operate in Barbados, and the state of Barbados can't go after these people in no kind of way, how, or fashion based off that charter of the African Exim Bank that was passed in the Parliament of Barbados. So it allows them, much similar to the citizenship by investment programs throughout the Caribbean, where the big European powers, right? The big European powers are saying to the Caribbean countries that have citizenship by investment that, listen, you are selling your passport to rich investors. So any terrorist, any money launderer, any threat to society could come and buy a passport and get diplomatic status, and then we can't pursue these people? No. So that is how Barbados started to become blacklisted. The countries that have citizenship and investment, that is why they're under scrutiny. So y'all can remember when Decon Mitchell, Prime Minister of Grenada, one of my favorite people, by the way. Good night to Decon Mitchell. Big ups to you, sir. When Decon Mitchell came into power from the Keith Mitchell administration, Decon Mitchell then had to revoke the ambassador status of foreign nationals. So you had Chinese nationals and other nationals around who had diplomatic status in Grenada. Right? And he had to revoke the privileges these people were receiving. Right? So the African Exim Bank has passed by the Act of Parliament in Barbados allows people to come into the countries with the same immunities. Right? The same immunities, free from both civil and criminal prosecution. Right? And the only person that could determine that is directly at the helm, which is the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister has an all be all say. I thought the office Prime Minister, not speaking with the individual. The office of Prime Minister has an all be all say as to the approvals or non-approvals. So it's just like the president of the African Exim Bank calling up the Prime Minister and say, well, send out Tom, Harry, Larry, Jack, and I would love all these persons to be granted permission to come in. Prime Minister don't even have to go and reference the cabinet. She don't have to reference nobody. Blacks approve and they bypass the Home Affairs Minister, the Attorney General, everybody, completely sidestepping the normal immigration process into Barbados. So it's like a fast track to allow people to come into the country, sidestepping the traditional immigration process. So whereas you had to pay the state, i.e. pay the immigration to come into Barbados, you are now paying directly to the people. You don't pay immigration no more. So anybody coming in on the auspices of the bank, they're probably gonna pay, but not pay the state, because they have their own process, which is set up in a way that it could be disguised as citizenship by investment. So mainly the wealthy are going to come through. Right? So that is the problem fundamentally that the Americans will have with the African Exim Bank, based off the reading the history, based off reading articles, based off my understanding of how a bank that is operating with diplomatic status, similar to the Vatican, which is a state within the state. The African Exim Bank is basically a state within Barbados, operating on its own auspices and rules. Now, banks in Barbados and banks all over the world are governed by legislation. So the Financial Institutions Act of Barbados governs all the local commercial banks. The Central Bank Act of Barbados governs the central bank. But what makes the African Exim Bank special is that the African Exim Bank does not come under the Financial Institutions Act in Barbados. The African Exim Bank is governed directly by a charter, right? Directly by a charter that was passed in the Parliament of Barbados. So we like, I hear nobody seriously come and oppose when this act was passed. Nothing, I never really hear anything coming up in any serious way as to what's really happening, the background of this bank, nothing like that. You just have people coming on the thing, making little one-off statements, making little public statements to probably, like, just, oh, they give it really loud, they give it really loud, they give it really loud, they give it really loud. We're in opposed to the bank, they give it really loud, a thing, and that's not really really discussion needs to be. Give it really loud is but a minute part of this entire right. About a minute part of this entire scenario. Now, it ain't my job necessarily to explain how and why the land could be given away for free and it not be a bad thing. That's not my job, and I'm not giving any of the government personnel who watch the show, I'm not giving you any narrative to go on the public and repeat. I'm not giving you no narrative, so I'm not going to explain it. It is your job to come and tell the people how and why the land could be given away for free and it not be such a bad thing. That's your guys' job. As it stays, the people of Barbados see it as a very bad thing, and the responsibility is on the policymakers, the consultants, and everybody else to come and explain to the people why essentially you would give the land to a bank, right, which is essentially a for-profit bank. Yeah. So Barbados is at a crossroad, and with Donald Trump in place, we are going to have to bring a plan ahead back to the future. And back to the future is basically a place of oh, let me just say this. It breaks my heart to say this. Donald Trump just signed an executive order to allow for the sale of firearms to become extremely easy or more easy. And I mean export of firearms. So an executive order was signed to allow for the export of firearms to become much more easier. Check out China. China is not a place that has serious gun crime. Huh? Not a place that has serious gun crime. So what are the chances that these guns being exported more easier now? Because I made a point on a previous video that Donald Trump is very pro-gun. If you check gun stocks, when Donald Trump is in power, the gun stocks, gun manufacturers are through the roof. Right? The National Rifle Association was one of Trump's donors. So therefore, with Trump in power, you could only expect leniency on firearms. Right? Now, I heard a clip in the paper, I read a clip. I read an article, saw a clip, where the guy at C2SA was saying that only police and military should have firearms. Now, with America outpouring firearms, It's either you're gonna buy legal firearms or you're gonna buy illegal firearms. So the illegal firearm market is profitable because of scarcity, right? Demand, supply, and scarcity, right? So if there's a situation with crime, legal upstanding citizens want a firearm, and the government denying all the firearm applications, you are now going to create a black market for firearm sales in Barbados, a more serious one. Because if you just lax all gun laws on the exports of firearms, most countries, firearms are illegal, but they still sell every day, right? So if the Barbados authorities realize what is happening in America, they know how to seriously get up and put serious policies in place. Because if we take gun selling now, in the next couple of months or a year, the Caribbean gonna be awash with guns. Because they're much easier now to export willy-nilly. And that is money going back into the United States economy. So think about it, people. With that being said, though, I am at the end. I am going to play a quick video and then yeah. Well, I don't have it anymore. Right. I'm going to play a quick video and then I'm going to come back and take your comments. And we're going to read out probably up until 10, you know? Yeah.
Find my square root in you share. Cosino Cosumi economy, it is a solid. Cosepo Cosu economy, it is a solid. Boy, you be check economy,
Hey, we're back. And that is basically the end of our talk. So now it's time for me to chat with you, take your comments and see what you are saying. Had a very good discussion. Said a lot. Oh, I have one more thing to say, by the way. No, I would have made some reference to what happened in Barbados between 1994 and thereafter, right? No, I want you all to remember when Barbados had manufacturing capacity in it. So y'all remember Mohammed Nasser and the wrote iron business, even local car importers, even used to manufacture Hino buses. It used to manufacture the minivans that we drive. Barbados had manufacturing capacity. But Barbados at the time had agriculture, sugarcane. We had money earning ventures going, right? Now, through globalization, right? Through globalization and introduction of the World Trade Organization rules, a lot of the barriers that we set up to protect our domestic economy was removed, right? And y'all remember that Barbados had a backbone in it called the Barbados Shipping and Trading, right? And it was the Ornafo government who oversaw the selling out of the Barbados Shipping and Trading. right? Which then saw a buoying to the Barbados economy from Trinidad. So we had the sale of the Barbados National Bank, which I think was one of the worst possible things that could have happened. Bank gone. Insurance Corporation of Barbados, insurance business gone, right? You then had countries like Hanshul and a lot of these big Trinidadian companies through the help of a visionary government, right? A visionary government, because Trinidad has surpluses on their books for all money and all wealth and some other things. So Trinidadian businesses through Caricom, right? And we need to revisit the Treaty of Shagaramas, the Caricom legislation, because that legislation gives favorable economic opportunity to Trinidad, right? Which allowed Trinidad to go around and invest with the help of their government to invest in Caribbean economies, right? Creating jobs for Trinidadians throughout the Caribbean. So profits and remittances come back into Trinidad to build up Trinidad's economy from through the Caribbean, right? So Barbados saw Trinity take over in terms of businesses. Up to today, we had the sale of Collins Pharmacy and one or two other businesses, indigenous Barbadian businesses, over to Trinidadian investment. Right? So the Barbados economy is not separated, right? It's not separated from the Trinidadian economy due to money buying happening through the Barbados shipping and trading, which was basically like the umbrella body for Barbados' manufacturing and retail. And so now it's changed. Now you see even the Indians coming in, and the Indians controlling their own logistics, having trade with India and other people, bringing in subsidized rates, with the assistance of government, of course, and companies like Clico and B&B and Sagicor, right? Ended up owning significant amounts of land in Barbados, right? So how much of the Clico plantations in St. John, right? How many plantations Clico own in St. John? How many plantations and land and assets does Sagicor own all over Barbados? And those are insurance firms, right? So what use are all of the best agricultural lands in Barbados being owned by insurance firms and no real production happening? So you sold over the lands to private corporations, and the private corporations killed them off in favor of importing food. So even if you wanted to develop agriculture, the government can't develop agriculture because the government owns land, but they don't own some of the best agricultural lands that these private corporations own. So therefore, for the government to get back the lands, they got to buy them. And the government ain't got the money to buy back a lot of these lands to put them back in agriculture. But lately we are seeing eminent domain and government just taking it up if they want it. You know, sounds a little Robert Mugabe. You know, we can just take it up from the white people and go and give it back over to the blacks. That's Robert Mugabe. You know, that's his thing. You know, sounds a bit Mugabe, but I guess in this day and age with leaders like Traore who putting the foot firm on the ground, it's less about color as in black and white, but more of fairness of economic opportunity for everybody. Blacks, whites, Indians, and everybody. Right? So the future of Barbados, as I say, we need to head back to the future. The future is less divisive structures in our economy and a return of the power to the people, and I mean economic power, not political power. because the political power in Barbados that we have is fictitious, right? And it's so fictitious, right, that whoever designed the system in Barbados the way that it is designed, they give the voting public in Barbados voting power, but they kept all of the economic power for themselves, right? And the people of Barbados, in its majority, just became workers to build the wealth of many of entrepreneurs throughout the world. And if you want to become a millionaire very fast, Barbados is the ultimate consumer economy for you to come to. If you have money, you can get more and more and more and more and more money to get to that next level. That is what Barbados is. A consumer's economy, not a productive economy, filled up with workers who will come and work for the wealthy to make the wealthy's profit margins much wider and much bigger. So we like to say that we elect prime ministers. We have never, ever, ever in this country. We have never, ever in this country elected a prime minister. Never, ever. We never elected a prime minister in this country. We elect 30 members of parliament. Those 30 members of parliament turn around and vote for a leader. They vote for a leader, and then that leader becomes the prime minister. Right? So I will end by saying Barbados needs a significant change. Right? Barbados needs a significant change into what a true, not a fictitious Westminster democracy, but a true democracy, right? Where the people can directly vote for the president of this country to run it, right? I think we need to do away with prime ministerial power and go on to presidential power, where the people of this country directly vote for the president of this country. And I can end on this one. This is where I agree with Trevor Prescott. This is where I agree with Trevor Prescott. I would abolish the Senate of Barbados, because the Senate of Barbados is just a rubber stamp position where you put people, where the Prime Minister puts senators in place to vote for every single government policy coming down the line. So really, really not useful to us. So if you're going to go Republic, I say I go the full way. I actually reform Barbados' political system and start with this fictitious democracy, which gives the people the illusion that they're actually voting for a leader. We never voted for a leader in Barbados. Never, ever, ever. Never. So if we want to have a change in Prime Minister, you got to change the MPs. Right? Because it is the MPs who vote for the Prime Minister who then leads, who then leads the government. The persons who don't support the Prime Minister supports the opposition leader. Right? But then they give us the impression that the system is so divided, or we got BLP MPs and DLP MPs, and that's rubbish and that's crap. And the truth needs to be told about Barbados' political system. Right? The truth needs to be told about the political parties, both are political parties. Right? If we are to head back to the future, because lying and trying to manipulate the truth at this point, where everybody has access to the internet, where everybody could go and fact check you, and where the world is headed to freedom of information, Barbados is headed the way of cybercrime to shut down the free flow of information, where the world is headed towards a freedom of information, where everything is supposed to be open and free flowing. So with that being said, let me take some comments. Yeah. So we had Annette Wood saying good night. We had Britt. We had Sean Cool. Square 4. We had Marcia saying good evening. Kemar and all alternate viewers. Square 4. Yes, good night to you. Good night to the CPSA. Joy is saying good evening. Tamika Harper is saying good evening to everyone. Sir Alfred Benjamin is saying good evening. Good evening, Sir Alfred. Good to have you back. Joy is saying Barbados will say with China because China has been very free-handed with their lending. Um, I hope you got some other reasons why Barbados would glean from the shore. Good night to Fabian Yard. And good night to everybody from the constituency of St. John. Just let the persons know to look out for me in and around St. John. We've been moving around St. John a lot, and we're going to continue to do our work in St. John. Um, you know, through lifelong learning and other institutions that we may have in place to um, check around. But we love all Barbadians all over the globe, all over the diaspora, Barbadians all over the world, Barbadians all over the US, all over the globe. Um, there is hope for the future of Barbados. Relentless is saying good night to you. Camellia Lewis is saying good night. Elaine Rivers, good night. Tyrone Nurse, good night to you. Good night to Rough House, Margaret, Tyrone, Shaba, Romeo, David, everybody, Oswald, Newton, Tracy, good night to you all. Joseph Cadogan, good night. Yes, good night to you all, good night to you all. Yeah. Right, Marcia asks, are we still paying back for the prison loan? Now, this is a question that needs to be answered by. This is a question that needs to be answered by the government. If you're still paying back for the prison loan, we pay $30 million a month. We need to know what it is now that we had the debt restructure. So, that is a question for the government to answer. Right. So I am asking you guys, what are your thoughts about tonight's show? And all you can give me a rating in the comments. You can give me some feedback and tell me what you think about what was said. If anything interesting caught your attention, you can bring it up. You can bring it up on the live. So, feedback always appreciated. Boy, you need to ask. You need to ask Ralph about that move. Well, this is not a show where Ralph will be discussed. They could bet you that. So it doesn't matter to me, per se. Yeah, I could show you that. Yes. YouTube user is asking where were you? Man, you left the void. Well, you had to recalibrate, do some professional things. At one point in time, I was employed, doing some so-called research work. However, I am no longer doing that research work at that particular place. But we moved on to other opportunities, which give me, leniency to be back on alternate views every Thursday. So, it hurt my heart a bit to be off, but breaks are always important to catch yourself, refresh and keep the ideas and the ideas going. It's never a good thing to overwork yourself. right? Never a good thing to overwork yourself. Rest, right? Rest within measure, rest is very important as well as working. So Joseph is saying Kemar, the prison, was built on a boat system. Right. Build, operate, lease, transfer. Right. Build, operate, lease, transfer is what the boat system is. And yes, the prison is built on that. I don't think the prison has been transferred to us as yet. Right. The prison ownership of the prison has been transferred to us as yet. So like I said, ask the government. Ask them. It's not my job to say what the government is doing or did per se. My job is not to give the government officials narratives to go with, but let them come and tell you the truth. Right? So ask questions. You can ask your Home Affairs Minister, who directly oversees the operations of the prison. You can ask your Minister of Finance, or you ask the Prime Minister or so about the prison loan. Yeah. No. I want to wish you all a good night. I want to wish you all a good night and thank all 157 persons for tuning in. I had a very good discussion tonight. Y'all had me talking from early, so I'm starting to get a little hoarse now. But thank you. I want to end off with a quote from the great man, the good man, Dr. Dennis Lowe. So let me just quote from page 88 to end off Alternate Views, which is a very excellent show tonight on Barbados' history and possible futures. I want to sign off by saying, I'm quoting from The Journey, the hurt of personal neglect. The hurt of personal neglect. Right? Of all the hurt we may experience, the kind that results from our own actions has to be rated as the worst. Right? Though we often try to rationalize and justify the way we treat ourselves at times, we must still realize that when we fail to love, honor, and respect ourselves, we create an open door for others to mistreat us and they will disrespect us. So many of us become caught up with trying to make everyone else, spouse, children, friends, boss, etc., happy that we often forget to pay attention to ourselves. We seem not to remember that to be able to truly make others feel good about themselves, we must first seek to derive a genuine sense of contentment that comes from within. The blind cannot lead the blind. Neither can the wounded be considered the more suited to offer healing to the wounded. The wounded must first find healing for themselves and seek to lead others who are wounded into a path of healing. Too many of us are struggling through life carrying tons of unneeded baggage, i.e., old family hurts, the bitterness of past and present toxic relationships, repeated personal failures, chronic self-doubt, and the like, which only serves to keep us from progressing into a life state of meaningful living. We become so frustrated with ourselves that the importance of maintaining a sense of holistic living will the mistreatment of self and others set in. End quote. No, Kemar Stuart will never be guilty of personal neglect anymore. So that was the important time of sabbatical, take it in the rest to refresh, to focus on oneself. Because if I don't focus on myself, then I can't focus on coming here to you to be able to give you the information as you need. Right? So as Annette Wood is saying, I have to use some honey to get the voice and everything going. Right? And we'll be back on track next week. So for the person who asked me if I am still a member of the DLP, as far as I know, I have not resigned. And the answer should still be yes, I am a member of the DLP still. And however, this show is not a political show and does not represent the views of said party at no point in time. And let me underscore and reaffirm that for you. This is a personal journey between me and the people of Barbados, alternate views, and it will remain that way. And at no point in time will alternate views be used as a platform to spill any political garbage or elseways from anybody. Okay? This is about fact, this is about truth, and having an outlet for you people to come to hear things that are bothering them, for them to express themselves. And I am afraid that political party platforms do not allow for you to do that adequately, because everything that is said on the platform is, oh, my hero is saying that because he's a D, she only saying that because she's a B, and we're gonna move past that now. Right? Don't continue to fall for the narratives of people, often friends, often friends who like to separate and divide this country. He's a B and he's a D, because it suit them. You're not doing that. Kemar Stuart believe in everybody. Kemar Stuart has friends, DLP, BLP, UPP, CBLP, Independent. Kemar Stuart is a friend of every Barbadian. And if given the opportunity, I will make it very practical. So my journey didn't necessarily start. I was motivated by partisan politics. I ain't come to politics because I don't want to be a member of the DLP. I came to politics because I wanted to help the people of Barbados. And that is what I am doing. And that is what I will continue to do. So have a good night, everyone. Stay safe. Love you all. And I will see you guys next week.
Find my square root in you share. Sinako Sony economy, it is a economy, it is a boy, me, economy.